poetry seems to be the centerpiece in your life. I mean, do you still believe in rock and roll?
Est-ce que vous croyez toujours au rock'n'roll puisque la poésie
Well,
c'est notre sang de votre vie?
I'm doing a rock and roll concert on the 22nd. I better believe in it. I was raised with rock and roll. I'm about the same age as rock. Well, I grew up with the evolution of rock and roll, and it's, for me, part of my experience as a human being, and also such an important part of our cultural voice. I think that rock and roll, for the generation before me and my generation, we look to rock and roll as a possible universal language. I mean, we didn't have computers and things that brought people together just like this, or Twitter, or cell phones, or anything. What we had was the language of rock and roll, and that was the unifying principle in the late 60s, or truthfully, the late 50s and 60s and 70s. And I think that no matter how we advance technically, it's still one of our most wonderful aspects of our voice, because it encompasses politics, sexual energy, dance energy, poetry. All these things are within the canon of rock and roll, and we all love it. It's I mean, who could, if you play a great rock and roll song that everybody loves, it brings everybody together for 4 minutes. So, yeah, I still believe in rock and roll.
Oui, je crois toujours au rock and roll. Samedi 22, nous allons jouer Horses en entier. Il faut se souvenir que pour les gens de ma génération et de la génération d'avant, le rock'n'roll était la première voie, un petit peu l'utopie collective. C'était bien avant les réseaux sociaux, avant Twitter, avant le téléphone portable. Il y avait une vraie utopie que les gens allaient se réunir autour de cette forme qui comprend à la fois la politique, l'énergie sexuelle, la poésie et tout un tas d'autres choses. Et tout le monde peut se regrouper et se retrouver autour d'une bonne chanson de rock'n'roll. Donc oui, je crois toujours au rock'n'roll. Une dernière question, je n'en ai pas, c'est au deuxième rang en bas.
Je voulais savoir ce qui l'a fasciné quand elle a voulu aller à New York, en fait, alors qu'elle ne connaissait pas forcément l'effervescence qu'il y avait à New York à cette époque-là. Comment elle a choisi de claquer la porte et d'y aller, comme Bob Dylan, plutôt
What was it that fascinated you in New York City when you first got there? And was it like Bob Dylan did a few years back?
Well, I was from South Jersey, which is close to Philadelphia. So I'm an East Coast girl. Bob Dylan was from the Midwest. It wasn't like that. I was very in tune with the city and the cultural aspects of a big city, and the history of America in terms of Philadelphia and New York City. But I really came to New York for a job. As a young girl, I went to Philadelphia first. Philadelphia is where the Declaration of Independence was written. It is the city of brotherly love. But there was no work in 1967, no work for a 20-year-old girl. Economically, it was hard hit. There was no work in South Jersey. And I had to work. I had to make a living. So I went to New York City. And there was a lot of work there. A lot of bookstores, a lot of opportunity. So I was like Dick Whittington. The streets of New York were paved with gold in terms of jobs. So for me it was work, and it also a magnificent city. The Empire State Building, it was like, God's hypodermic, it was quite a city. Also because I was from a rural community, and I didn't look like everybody else. Sorry. I'm sorry. I really don't use telephones much, and I forgot to leave it. I'm sorry. It's so rude. But New York was a wonderful place in 1968 and 67 because it was down and out. It was a poor city then. It was having difficult economic times. There were jobs, but you could get an apartment very cheap. There were many, many artists, many musicians, many poets because it was cheap to live. It was the perfect place for an outsider, an outcast to come. So it was a beautiful city because I found a job and I found Robert Mapplethorpe.